The rain wouldn't stop that day. It tapped against the chapel roof like a clock running out of time. The sky was low gray and heavy, as if it knew what we were burying. My name is Rachel Monroe, and that was the day we said goodbye to my sister Chloe. Her ashes were sealed inside a marble niche right beneath a bronze plaque with her name spelled wrong. I pointed it out. No one listened. People grieved like statues, silent, stiff, beautifully useless. I stood there holding a damp funeral program with trembling fingers, still trying to understand how we got here, how she ended up there. And then I noticed something strange. While everyone was huddled under umbrellas, whispering condolences, they didn't mean my mother disappeared. Angela Monroe, a woman who'd spent her whole life managing appearances like a business portfolio, and yet, in the middle of her own daughter's memorial, she vanished, slipping away with something bundled in her arms. It was wrapped in a white baby blanket. I didn't ask. I didn't even move. I just watched, too stunned to stop her. Maybe I thought it was part of the ritual. Maybe I told myself she just needed a moment alone. But deep down, something in me stirred. A cold instinct I couldn't explain. Hours later, back home, I couldn't sit still. I kept hearing the way Chloe used to laugh at my mom's rules. How she'd once said, "If I ever disappear, just check the places Mom hates the most." So I did. And that's how I ended up driving past Holy Spirit Parish, a small church tucked behind an empty grocery store with peeling paint and a broken swing out front. A place my mom once called a shelter for people with no plan. I parked the car and stepped out into the rain. Around the back of the church under a metal awning was something wooden. A crib. Just sitting there, like it had been left behind in a hurry. I moved closer, heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The crib was old, scratched up, and soaked at the edges. But inside was something that made my knees buckle. A baby, an actual baby. He was pale, lips slightly blue, swaddled too tightly like someone tried to silence even his breath, and around his tiny ankle was a hospital bracelet. It read, "Baby boy Reyes." Reyes, that was Marco's last name, Chloe's boyfriend, the one my mom had banned from the house 2 years ago. I reached into the crib with trembling hands and touched his chest. There was a heartbeat. Barely, but it was there. That's when my breath hitched, my voice cracked through the storm as I whispered the only question that made any sense. "Mom, what did you do?" I sat in my car outside the church, the rain fogging up the windows, the baby sleeping in my arms, like he'd fought through a storm to find me. I kept thinking, how long had he been out there? How long had Mom been planning this? I needed answers, but answers never come in the present. They always live in the past. So here's the truth, how it all began. 2 years ago, Chloe brought Marco Reyes to our Thanksgiving dinner. She showed up late in a flannel shirt and ripped jeans, her hand locked in his like they'd been through war together. He had grease on his knuckles and a smile that didn't care what silverware he used. I remember the way he pulled out her chair, the way she laughed like she finally felt safe, and I remember the look on my mother's face like Chloe had tracked mud across a white carpet. Later that night, when the dishes were stacked and the wine was gone, Mom pulled me aside. "He's not Monroe material," she said, voice flat. "We build futures in this family, not fairy tales." I wanted to push back. I should have. But instead, I just nodded. That's what I did. Back then, kept the peace by swallowing my voice. But Chloe didn't. She never did. 3 months later, she told me she was pregnant. Her hands were shaking when she said it, but her eyes were steady. Fierce. She said Marco was working extra hours, that they were scared, but they were going to make it work. And for the first time in a long time, she looked hopeful. I told her I'd support her no matter what, but when Angela found out, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sat at the kitchen table slicing an apple so precisely it looked surgical. Then she looked up at Chloe and said, "You have options. You don't have to ruin your life over this mistake." Chloe's jaw clenched. She stood up, walked out, and didn't come back. And just like that, she was erased. At family functions, Mom started referring to her as the other one. Dad, he just got quieter, like his voice had been put on ice. But Chloe and I kept in touch. Secret calls, late night texts, photos of the nursery she was painting herself with little suns and stars and the words, "You are already loved." I offered to come visit. She said not yet, that she was keeping the peace for now. And then silence, no texts, no calls, just gone. 3 weeks passed. Then came the email from Mom, one sentence, no subject line. Chloe passed away during childbirth. The funeral will be held Sunday. I stared at that line until it blurred. No details, no explanation, no emotion, just erased again. At the funeral, there was no baby, no mention of one, only a photo slideshow of Chloe at age 12 in a piano recital dress she hated. I thought maybe I was losing my mind. Until I found Noah, until I realized what they were trying to do. I needed the truth. So that night, after making sure the baby was safe and warm, I drove straight to my parents' house. My dad, Thomas, opened the door. He looked older, smaller, like guilt had aged him faster than time ever could. I didn't wait for pleasantries. "Did you know she had the baby?" I asked. He didn't answer. I stepped closer. "Dad, did you know?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, looked down at his feet. And in that silence, I got my answer. He wouldn't stop shivering. Even wrapped in my coat, even with the car heater blasting, the baby's skin felt like chilled porcelain. I drove with one hand on the wheel, and the other pressed gently against his chest, whispering to him over and over, "It's okay. You're okay. I've got you." But inside I was panicking. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I ran 3 red lights. I didn't even care. The only thing I could think was he cannot die. Not now, not after all she gave to bring him here. By the time I pulled into the ER parking lot at St. Mary's, the wipers were still battling rain, but I didn't wait. I burst through the sliding doors like something out of a bad dream. The triage nurse looked up mid-sentence, saw the baby in my arms, and everything shifted. She stood, snapped her fingers. Suddenly, there were hands and blankets and medical staff swarming us like a well-trained army. Someone asked me, "Where did you find him?" And I lied. I found him, behind the church, alone. They nodded, moving fast. No time for questions. That lie bought him a chance. A doctor shouted something about core temperature. A young nurse wrote possible exposure on a clipboard. And then I heard the words I didn't know I needed to hear. "He's stable." Just barely, but he was stable. They rolled him into a warm isolette under glowing heat lamps, his little chest rising and falling, like he was still trying to decide whether he trusted this world. And standing there, soaked to the skin and shaking, I whispered the first name that came to me. Noah. It was the name of the story Chloe used to read to me when I had nightmares. The boy who survived the flood. I sat down in a plastic hospital chair and felt everything hit at once. The weight of the rain, the grief I hadn't let myself feel, the truth I now had to carry. When they finally released him to me with temporary custody paperwork and a warning about Child Protective Services, I drove straight home. I didn't cry in the car. I didn't cry unlocking the door. But the second I stepped into my apartment and saw the photo of Chloe on my bookshelf, the one where she's covered in paint and laughing so hard her eyes are closed, I broke. I wrapped Noah in her old quilt, the one she made herself back in high school with crooked stitches and sunflowers that looked more like blobs. And I sat on the floor holding him close, rocking him gently while sobbing into the fabric that still smelled like her. I whispered every apology I hadn't said out loud. "I'm sorry I didn't do more. I'm sorry I didn't stop them. I'm so sorry you had to do this alone." But we weren't alone now. I looked down at Noah, already sleeping again, and I made a promise right then and there. I won't let them erase you. That's when I heard the knock. Sharp, precise, like someone expecting the door to open on command. I stood up slowly, cradling Noah in one arm as I walked to the door. When I opened it, my mother was standing there. Angela Monroe. Perfect makeup, dry hair, not a single drop of rain on her. Like the world obeyed her in ways it didn't obey the rest of us. She looked at me then, at the baby, and her voice was calm. Too calm. That kind of calm that makes your blood run cold. "You need to return him," she said, "before this gets messy." I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a second. I just sat there on the floor holding Noah against my chest, listening to every creak in the apartment like it might be a threat. I kept hearing her voice in my head. "Return him, before this gets messy." Messy. That was the word she used for her own grandson, like he was a stain on her reputation instead of a human being. The next morning, it started. A knock at the door. Not Mom this time. This time it was a man in a gray suit with a clipboard and perfect posture. "Rachel Monroe." I nodded, clutching Noah tighter. "You've been served." He handed me a thick envelope, then turned and walked away without another word. Inside was a petition for emergency guardianship, filed by Angela Monroe. My own mother was trying to take Noah away from me, legally, permanently. The paperwork said I was emotionally unstable, that I was acting irrationally in the wake of a family tragedy, that I was not in a position to provide adequate care. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear it up. But I didn't. I sat down at the kitchen table, took a breath, and started building my case. I pulled every document I had from the hospital. Photos of Noah in the crib, the hospital bracelet, Chloe's old texts. I printed copies, labeled folders. I emailed the nurse from the ER asking if she'd be willing to give a statement. I called every friend who had ever heard Chloe talk about wanting to keep the baby. Every voicemail I had saved from Chloe suddenly became evidence. But there was one piece still missing, one name I had avoided until now. Marco, Chloe's boyfriend, the baby's father, the only other person who had a right to fight for Noah with me. I hadn't told him yet. I hadn't known how, but now I didn't have a choice. So I scrolled through my old contacts, found his name, and hit call. It rang 4 times. 5. Then his voice hoarse and distant. "Hello." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My throat tightened. "Hello," he said again. "Marco, it's Rachel, Chloe's sister." Silence. "I need you to listen to me very carefully." He didn't speak, but I could hear the air shift like he was bracing himself. "Marco, the baby Noah, he's alive." More silence. I waited, then I heard it, a sharp inhale. Then his voice cracked in disbelieving. They told me he didn't make it." "They lied," I whispered. "They lied to you, to all of us. I found him at a church. Mom left him there, alone." I could hear movement on the other end, a door opening, keys rattling, heavy breathing. "Where are you?" he asked. "Downtown. East Monroe Apartments, Unit 3B. He didn't respond, just hung up. 27 minutes later, there was another knock at my door. This one didn't come with a clipboard. It came with fists pounding hard enough to shake the hinges. I opened it, and there he was. Marco. Eyes bloodshot. Shirt inside out, like he'd run straight through grief just to get here. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, then looked down at the baby in my arms. His lips trembled. His knees buckled. "Let me see him," he said, barely above a whisper. I stepped aside and placed Noah gently into his arms. And for the first time since Chloe died, I saw someone hold that baby like he mattered more than anything else in the world. Marco didn't cry, but his whole body did. Marco didn't leave that night. He stayed. We sat in my tiny living room with Noah asleep between us in a borrowed bassinet, and we made a decision we weren't letting him go. Not to the system, not to my mother, not to anyone who thought this baby was a problem to be cleaned up. We were going to fight. We opened our laptops, poured coffee, and turned my apartment into a war room. Step 1, file for joint emergency custody. As his biological father and next of kin, Marco had rights, and as Chloe's sister with a history of care and temporary custody from the hospital, so did I. Step 2, build a file big enough to block a freight train. We compiled everything: photos from the ER, the hospital bracelet with baby boy Reyes, Chloe's prenatal care receipts, every message she'd sent me, talking about how much she wanted to keep him. I printed screenshots from my phone, underlined dates, highlighted phrases like, Marco is excited, and this baby is my chance to start over. We made folders, one for legal documents, one for Chloe's messages, one for Angela's threats. Marco even found a text from Chloe that read, "If anything happens to me, promise you'll find Rachel. She'll protect him." It felt like Chloe was still guiding us, like she'd left breadcrumbs hoping we'd follow them. But as soon as we gained ground, the pushback came fast. 3 nights later, I came home from the grocery store and found my front door cracked open. Nothing was stolen, but everything had been moved just enough to feel wrong. A cabinet left open, a photo frame tilted, a lamp knocked sideways. And on the kitchen counter, a note written in sharp black ink, "Don't push this." Marco checked every room. I called the police, but without forced entry or a clear threat, they couldn't do much. Just filed a report and left. I slept with a knife under my pillow that night. No one ever stirred. The next evening, there was another knock at the door, but this time it wasn't a threat. It was my dad, Thomas Monroe. He looked worn down, tired in a way that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying something heavy for too long. He didn't say much, just held out a weathered leather journal. "This was Chloe's," he said quietly. "I found it in her storage unit. She wanted you to have it if anything ever happened." I took it slowly, unsure what I was about to read. He stood there silent while I flipped through the pages. It was her handwriting, slanted, messy, beautiful. Thoughts, sketches, bits of poetry, baby names, and at the very back, taped to the inside cover, was an envelope. It had my name on it. Just Rachel. I glanced up at Dad. He stepped back, eyes glassy. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear to you, I didn't know what your mother was planning." Then he left. I sat down on the couch and stared at the envelope. My hands were shaking when I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of folded notebook paper. I unfolded it and read, "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone." My heart stopped. I blinked, trying to steady myself. And then I kept reading. The courthouse looked like something carved out of ice. Tall columns, cold stone, and the kind of silence that makes your breath feel too loud. I held Noah close to my chest as Marco and I walked up the slick marble steps together. He was bundled tight in Chloe's sunflower quilt, a tiny piece of warmth in a place built for judgment. Inside the courtroom was small, intimate by design. No shouting, no distractions, just facts and consequences. At the front sat Judge Valerie Denton. She was everything I expected and more. Stern eyes, clean lines, a presence that said, "Don't waste my time. Don't waste this child's future." Angela was already seated with her attorney, her expression perfectly calm. You'd think she was at a board meeting, not a custody hearing. The proceedings began with her lawyer standing up and painting a version of me I barely recognized. "Your Honor, Ms. Monroe is in a heightened emotional state. She has made impulsive decisions following her sister's passing, including unlawfully retaining custody of an infant without legal authority or training. We're not questioning her intentions, only her stability." I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. Because I had something stronger than performance. Proof. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up slowly, adjusted the microphone, and pressed the play on a screen behind the judge. Dash cam footage began to roll. No audio. Just a date. A time. A cold, still frame of Angela's car parked along the back of Holy Spirit Church during Chloe's funeral. And then there she was, my mother, stepping out with a bundle in her arms, walking toward the back of the building. The camera didn't catch her returning, but the crib wasn't there in the next frame, and her arms were empty. The judge leaned in, eyebrows raised. Angela shifted in her chair for the first time. I turned to the court, my voice steady. That's the church. That's my mother. That's the baby. Judge Denton looked to Angela's attorney. Any explanation? A pause. Then grief clouds judgment. Your Honor, my client believed she was making a safe temporary choice. And right then, Marco stood up. No prompting, no cue. He stepped forward, looked the judge straight in the eye, and said, I'm the baby's father. His name is Noah. Chloe and I plan to raise him together. I was told he didn't survive childbirth. That was a lie. I was manipulated. And I want to be part of my son's life. His voice didn't crack, but the air in the room did. Angela's lawyer tried to object, but Judge Denton raised a hand. Enough. Sit down. Then something I never expected happened. My father Thomas stood up. The man who had been quiet in corners, who avoided confrontation like it burned. He rose from his seat, cleared his throat, and spoke into the room like it cost him everything. My wife, he stopped, started again. My wife tried to erase our grandson. Dead silence, the kind that falls before something breaks wide open. I looked at Angela, and for the first time in my life, she looked cornered. Not angry, not powerful, just exposed. Noah stirred in my arms, letting out a soft sigh. I held him closer and whispered in my heart, we're not done yet, but we're getting there. The room was silent. Not courtroom silent, sacred silent. Judge Denton scanned the papers in front of her one last time, then looked up. Her voice was calm, measured, absolute. This court grants temporary joint custody of the minor Noah Reyes to Rachel Monroe and Marco Reyes, pending a full custodial review. I couldn't breathe. I heard the words, but they felt like they were landing in someone else's life. Until she said them again. The court also orders mandatory counseling for Angela Monroe. Supervised visitation only. There it was, truth, on the record, stamped, sealed, real. Angela didn't flinch. Not visibly. She sat there, expression smooth as ever, not even turning her head when the gavel fell. But I saw it. I saw the way her knuckles gripped the armrest like she was holding on to a version of control that no longer existed. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. Not many, but enough. Whispers buzzed around us like static. That's the Monroe family! Didn't they abandon a baby or something? Angela brushed past them like they were dust. She didn't say a word to me. Not congratulations, not good luck, not even how could you? Which was fine, because I had nothing left to say to her either. I blocked her number that night, deleted the contact, removed the name from every message thread. Not to forget her, but to make space for the version of me that didn't need her approval anymore. And then, at around 11:30 p.m., I heard a soft thud at the door. I peeked through the peephole. No one was there, just a plain white envelope sitting on the mat. I picked it up slowly, cautious, but curious. Inside, a check, made out in my name. 6 figures, from a Monroe family trust I hadn't heard about in years. No letter, no apology, just a sticky note attached. It read, "He's still a Monroe." That's what she wrote. Not I'm sorry, not thank you. Just a reminder that no matter what we fought for, no matter how hard we pulled away, in her mind, he still belonged to the name. I stood there staring at that check like it was poison wrapped in ribbon, and for a moment, just a moment, I almost ripped it in half. But instead, I placed it face down on the counter, walked into Noah's room, and kissed his forehead while he slept. Because he wasn't just a Monroe. He was a Reyes. He was Chloe's. And now, he was mine too. We didn't get a happy ending, but we got a beginning, and that felt like more than enough. The court battle was over for now. The papers were signed. The arrangements were official. Noah was ours, not legally perfect, not emotionally tidy, but real. Marco moved into the apartment next door. We knocked down part of the wall between the kitchens so we could pass through without unlocking doors. We split nights mostly. I handled mornings. He handled midnight bottle duty. We laughed at the diaper disasters. We cried when we couldn't figure out why Noah wouldn't stop crying. And somehow, we became parents. Some days we barely spoke. Some days we talked for hours about nothing. Everything grief, guilt, hope diapers, Chloe. I started writing again. Not press releases. Not speeches for other people. But pages in a journal, just like Chloe used to do. Most of them started with, "You wouldn't believe the mess you left behind." Marco took Chloe's old art studio, the one with cracked tile and sunlight that poured in like forgiveness, and turned it into a nursery. He painted the walls himself. Yellow. Not because it was trendy, because Chloe once said yellow was the color that didn't ask for attention, but still made everything brighter. On Sundays, Dad came over. Quietly. Softly. With groceries he didn't know how to cook, and stories he wasn't sure he had the right to tell. He'd sit on the floor with Noah and read board books like they were sacred texts. Angela didn't come. She didn't call, she didn't write. The silence was loud, but for once, it was the kind of silence I could live with. One evening, I found an old folder labeled Chloe, college apps. Inside were essays she never submitted and poems she never shared. I read one out loud to Noah as he fell asleep. "You are not the storm," I whispered. "You are what survived it." His tiny chest rose and fell with the weightless rhythm of safety. And for the first time, in a long time, I didn't feel like I was drowning. We started taking him to the park on Saturday afternoons. Marco would bring coffee. I'd bring too many snacks. We'd sit on the bench near the pond and watch other families chasing sunlight. It almost felt normal. Almost. Then one afternoon, a woman I didn't recognize approached. She looked like someone who'd once been beautiful and still carried the weight of that expectation. She hesitated before speaking. "Are you Rachel?" she asked. I nodded, cautious. She looked down at the baby, then back up at me. "I knew your sister," she said quietly. "We met at a prenatal class. She told me what your mom threatened to do if she kept the baby." My heart stilled. Everything slowed, because I thought I knew the worst of it. But in that moment, I realized I didn't. Not yet. It came out of nowhere. A news alert. Small article. No photos, no press conference. Just a statement posted quietly on the Monroe Foundation's website. Angela Monroe issues a formal public apology for her role in concealing the existence of her grandson. In honor of her late daughter, Chloe Monroe, she has established a $500,000 scholarship fund titled the Monroe Art Fund for Single Mothers Pursuing Creative Degrees. I stared at the screen. Not because I forgave her, but because I never thought I'd see her admit anything, especially not in public. Later that week, I got an email from a private account. "Just one sentence, I'd like to see Noah if you're willing." Supervised. No assumptions. I read it 3 times. I waited 2 days before replying. And when I did, all I wrote back was Sunday. 1 hour. My apartment. I'll be present. When she showed up, she looked different. Smaller. Not in stature, but in presence. Like someone who knew she didn't get to take up space anymore unless invited. She brought nothing with her. No toys, no flowers, no bribes, just herself. She sat down across from me. Her hands were trembling, though she tried to hide it. I held Noah in my arms for a long moment before I passed him over. She took him carefully, like he was made of light instead of bone. And then, it hit her. I saw it in her face. Her mouth quivered, her eyes filled, her breath hitched, and for the first time since Chloe's funeral, she broke. "He looks like her," she whispered, voice cracking. Her shoulders shook. She held Noah to her chest and wept into his tiny blanket like she was begging for a second chance she'd never be sure she deserved. And when she looked at me through tears, waiting for judgment, I just said, "That's why I'm raising him different." Because it was true. We weren't repeating cycles, we were rewriting them. The visit ended quietly. No promises, no clean conclusions, but maybe a first step. Weeks passed, seasons shifted. Noah started smiling more. Marco started sleeping less. I started believing in soft mornings again. And then, on the first real warm day of spring, we went back to the place it all started, Chloe's memorial bench. The sun was setting just behind the trees. Marco carried Noah. I brought flowers. Dad met us there. So did Angela. She stood a little apart, not quite in the circle, but close enough to hear the laughter. We told stories about Chloe sneaking out through the garage window, about how she painted her sneakers instead of buying new ones, about how she once drew stars on the ceiling of my bedroom because she said nightmares don't like constellations. Marco leaned over and kissed Noah's head. "She'd be proud of you, little man." I looked around at the family we had become. Not the one we started with, not the one we were supposed to be, but the one that showed up when it counted. And I whispered the truth I had carried with me through every chapter of this storm. We're not perfect, but we're honest now. And sometimes that's the beginning. The wind rustled the leaves above us. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a blessing.